So thanks y'all for being here at our third network of pediatric palliative care educators meeting. If you somehow got here without joining our listserv, please just take a moment and join the listserv today. We have a website now, which the web address is listed there. There's not that much on it, but continue to come back and look at our website. We'll be posting our recordings of these meetings and upcoming meeting information and things like that. So please take a peek at that. Just a plug for the meetings. We actually have meetings scheduled now through the rest of 2022. So today, you all are here for an education innovation session with Tanya and Rachel. We'll talk about that in a minute. In July, we're really excited to welcome Ann Kellerman, who will be leading us in a discussion about incorporating anti-racism into our teaching. And then in September, we're gonna try something new called a rapid fire educational exchange, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then in November, Kamara von Bremen, who's a member of our advisory board for NPPCE, is going to present a work in progress with her colleague Susan Poitras on including bereaved parents in education. So we're excited to learn more about that. So just a plug for our September session. We're going to try something that's sort of modeled after the AHPM, for those of you who went to old AHPM meetings, the interactive educational exchange. So we're going to ask 4 people or groups to present, to come and lead some sessions in this exchange. So if you are a presenter, what will happen is you'll have 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting to kind of make your pitch for the topic that you're presenting on, whether that's a work in progress or a cool educational innovation or just something you've been thinking about or want to talk more about. So you'll have 5 minutes to kind of make your pitch. We'll have 4 pitches, and then participants will be able to choose their breakout room where they'll get to learn more about one of the topics. We have 2 really cool topics already lined up for this, and we're looking for 2 more. So if anybody on the call has a project that they'd love to present to NPPCE or an idea or something, just send me an email. My email is up on the slide there, and we'll send this call out to our listserv in the next week or 2 as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our presenters today. We're just super excited and honored to be learning today from Tanya Aurora, who is another member of our NPPCE advisory committee, and Rachel Rush, who is Tanya's partner in crime down in LA. And the 2 of them have been using improv to teach primary palliative care skills, and they're going to tell us about it today. Thanks, Tanya and Rachel.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And then Amy, would you mind just taking a look in the chat every once in a while? And if there is something, could you just unmute? And if anyone wants to unmute as we're going through, we would love questions. We're so excited to talk about what we've learned from improv and applying it to palliative care. We're actually even more excited to hear your thoughts on it. So please just feel free to interrupt as we're going through. As a disclosure, Rachel is a Sojourn Scholar, and so some of this work and moving this work forward is through Cambia Health Foundation. What we're hoping to do today is to think through a little bit about how the tenets of improv apply to concepts that we try to teach in primary palliative care. And then we're going to demonstrate some improv exercises just to show you in like real life how we apply this. And then we want to end our portion of the presentation just by thinking through, you'll see throughout the presentation how we've applied improv to primary palliative care, but we've also used improv exercises to talk through implicit bias and cultural humility. And then narrative improv is a curriculum that we have more recently launched, and that really is thinking about what healing could look like together as we move through healthcare.
Thank you for that, Tanya, and echoing the gratitude for being here. It's so wonderful to be with so many friends and colleagues, and we're just so grateful for the space and excited to learn from all of you too. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel. By background, I'm a social worker working at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So Tanya's partner in crime, I think, is maybe my favorite title to ever have received, and I'm very grateful for that. But those of you who don't know me, my background is actually in the performing arts. I have a BFA in theater and studied professional clowning and immersive performing arts. And I have often started to find now that some of that training was really some of my best training for palliative care. We'll tell you a little bit more about the origin story of this work as our presentation continues. But to know it at the outset, improv theater and performing used to be something that I kind of hid in the background, something that I wanted to ensure that was the secondary thing people learned about me as I became a very serious social worker. But the more that started to come out with conversations with Tanya and other like-minded people on my team, the more we really started to see this overlap between improv theater, the arts, and education and palliative care. So with that, and as this education started to grow, this is the definition of improv theater that we like to use. Sometimes when people hear improv theater, their minds immediately go to things like Saturday Night Live and Whose Line Is It Anyway, which is such a natural place to go. I think communally, that's the form of improv theater that we know the most. And that is a wonderful and exciting and fun form of improv theater that really is joyful to take part in and joyful to witness. Really though, the root of improv theater, like the root of a lot of collaborative arts, is in discussing how you are in space with another person, how you are a partner with other people around you, how you join in partnership with people to create spaces in collaboration by listening, being open, and being receptive to the people around you. That's really the basis of improv theater. And this definition of improv being a form of performance created collaboratively in present time without prior rehearsal or use of an established script really strips that down. Nothing in here about being funny, nothing in here about really even performing with a capital P, but really about being in a collaborative space with one another. Next slide, please. We also like to acknowledge that medical improv is something that we're so grateful has been around for a bit and that we have learned from. And the use of medical improv, particularly to teach communication skills and the acknowledgement that clinicians have, like improv performers do, the mental and emotional agility to listen and respond in the moment. Those are things we're being asked to do as clinicians. Those are the very similar things that we as improv performers are asked to do. So how do we think about that overlap? We're grateful for their leadership and their guidance as we've taken it into our form of palliative care. Next slide.
So I came to palliative care after many years of being a pediatric hospitalist and doing global health work. And as I transitioned into palliative care, there were also increasing opportunities for teaching. And I am a nervous public speaker, as you might have already picked up on my voice. And I thought, well, I want to be better at public speaking, and I'm having all these life transitions. Maybe I should think about something. And I had read this article about a woman who had turned 40 and tried an improv class. And I said, well, I'm a woman who's turning 40. I should try an improv class. And Rachel, knowing her background in the theater, I said, Rachel, do you know of any improv classes? She's like, oh, we live in Los Angeles, yes, and sent me this wonderful list, and I tried a class, and class was on Tuesday night, and on Wednesday morning, I would come in and I would say, that thing we did in class, that's palliative care. That's what we're doing when we walk into the room. And Rachel would say, yes, and tell me more. And then it just kept growing from there. And so often residents will come to us and say, you know, we want to learn about that magic that you do in palliative care, that thing that happens when you walk into the room and then you leave the room and you must have done something because everybody feels better. So what is the spell or the magic or the potion you are using? And what we've really found through utilizing the tenets of improv and improv exercises is actually to remind all of us in healthcare that we all have that magic within us. We all come with that skills. Rachel's going to elaborate that on a little bit more.
As Tanya and I kept talking more and more and more over those weeks, we started to mine even deeper and wonder, what are the things that are feeling so resonant? What are the things that are feeling so exciting and like they're giving us language and tools that maybe we didn't have before? Through those conversations over time, we started to pull out and identify tenets of improv that really have now become foundational to the work and education we continue to grow. So I'll share some of those tenets here before we then move into some exercises and describing those exercises that we've been using together. So the first tenet is maybe the one that's most popularly known in improv, and that's the idea of yes and. Sometimes when people come to our workshops, that's the one that they have heard of. And it's been a really interesting and exciting space to talk through what that might mean for different people. For us, as we've been building this work, we really hold up yes and as the idea of how to build partnership and how to really create a generous and compassionate partnership from diverse perspectives. Sometimes people think yes and they wonder, how do you manage conflict? How, if things are feeling dissonant or tense or different, where does that interact with the yes and? And really, we have found, especially through talking with this more with our colleagues, that that yes and actually creates even more space for those dialogues to feel connected and supported and safe and vulnerable. The idea of, yes, I hear what you are, I hear your ideas about care for this patient and family, and can we tell you our perspective from having learned about their values over time? Yes, I hear your understanding about a prognostication and what you see the pathway forward is, and can I tell you a little bit more about what I'm hearing or what I might be worried about or what I'm holding and thinking? So the idea that yes and creates open, growing dialogues as opposed to yes but, or especially no but. We also love to hold up quotes from people who have inspired us over time, and Tina Fey, of course, being a guru of improv. If you haven't read her book, it's a wonderful one. She holds up yes and as saying that it means not to be afraid to contribute. In fact, it's your responsibility to contribute. Your initiations are worthwhile. And we hold that up both for ourselves as clinicians, and how do we ensure that that space is being created for our patients and their families? How do we ensure that they feel confident and safe and supported, that their initiations are worthwhile, their contributions are worthwhile, and we can build in this space together? Next slide, please. A really central tenet of improv is getting down to that place within ourselves where we can listen to our inner voice and follow our intuition. I like to start this slide with reading this quote from comedian performer Matt Walsh. And you can almost hear it as being something that could be used in medical education if you didn't know that he was a performer himself. The quote is, "You are enough. You don't have to put on a show or develop tons of knowledge or fake anything. You have plenty of information in your brain. Just respond how you would respond as yourself. It's about coming to terms with I know I am enough. And it's about relinquishing your idea about what the scene is about. You got to let that go and listen to what your scene partner is saying. Free yourself from having to be perfect. Just support, yes, and listen and trust your partner." I recognize in sharing this space about following our intuition and about being our most authentic selves will resonate and be held differently for all of us based on our own lived experience. And that also feels important to acknowledge. How do we each connect with that place that is our own inner voice, our intuition, and also acknowledge that when we are part of spaces or systems where that might not feel as supported or might not feel as present, and how do we really ensure for our colleagues that that can be something that changes over time? And yes, this idea of I am my bravest clinician self when I'm trusting myself. I think that's something we all came to this work for a variety of reasons, but I think we all probably came with some sort of call or some sort of leaning or some sort of interest. And do we lose that over time? Do we lose that with our different forms of medical education, with the stress of working in medical systems, with the brokenness of working in medical systems? How can we come back to that for ourselves, each other, and our patients and families? Next slide, please. This idea of the space between can mean something both physical and something a little bit more energetic. This is sort of where my theater background of the space between us starts to really come to the forefront. But in creating a collaborative space with one another, there is both yourself, the people you are in relationship with, and the things that are happening in between you. As I mentioned, that can be informed, of course, by physical space. Are you sitting at level with person above them, below them? What is the space like, the room like? Are you in a family meeting? Are you in a really tight NICU room? Where are you in the physical space? How might that physical space be held by the person you are opposite? Is a close, tight space potentially something that feels difficult, threatening, vulnerable for the person that you are opposite? How do we really be thoughtful and mindful about those spaces? And then really, next to that is the idea of building upon and within each other's humanity. And that comes from that building of the space in between us. Some of our exercises that we'll discuss later in the presentation will hopefully illuminate this theme even more. Next slide, please.
So to build a little bit on what Rachel was highlighting about yes and, in improv, you accept the gifts that are given. So we come to the scene with our own perspective. And when we partner with someone else, they might say something that we never would have thought of. And to really accept that as a gift, because then together you can create something out of the two of you that you never would have been able to create by yourself. We do this all the time in palliative care, right? Like we might say something and then the patient and the family bring their expertise that only they can bring to the table. And then the cardiologist brings their expertise and the oncologist brings their expertise. And together we all create the scene. And separately, we wouldn't be able to do it. So really recognizing that each of those contributions is a gift and how important that is for us to create a well-rounded scene together. We talk about this idea of partnership, and in these exercises, we want people to try to be 100% responsible for 50%. And what we mean by that is bring your whole self to this interaction, and also make sure that you are allowing equal space for your partner to bring their whole selves to this interaction. So 100% responsible for bringing your whole self and 100% responsible for making sure that your partner is also able to bring 100% of themselves to the interaction. There is this thing that actors do before an improv performance, and they say to each other backstage, "I got your back." And we recognize that it is hard to bring 100% of yourself to every single interaction and on every single day. So what we encourage is our learners when we're teaching this is bring 100% of everything you have in that moment, in that day, in that interaction, and recognize that you're not alone. You are surrounded by a team, you are in engagement with the patient and family, and together we will have each other's back. Keegan-Michael Key, who is also just an amazing improv actor and teacher, talks about this idea that improv actors are almost at war together. And through that, you build an intimacy, telepathically communicating to each other and become a tight group. I got your back, I got your back, I got your back. And I feel like every time we walk into a consult or meeting a patient or checking in on a patient, that is what we do in palliative care. I got your back, and knowing that together we are going to telepathically communicate to each other and support each other in this conversation. And then we extend that to patients and families. I got your back.
Thank you so much for that, Tanya. I feel like I always learn so much in hearing you talk about, especially that last piece. These tenets are what we then use as our agreements. So Tanya and I, over time, we're talking about this intersection of improv and palliative care and palliative medicine, and we thought about building a curriculum. How do we bring maybe our team into this? Could we run workshops? Could we invite other people into exploring these spaces to see what they think about it and how it might inform their own clinical practice? As we were building those workshops, these then, the tenets that we reviewed became our tenets. They really, again, that word of foundation, they became sort of our mantras for that space together. As we're inviting people to do improv exercises, for folks who don't have an improv background, how can we use these tenets as the things that we're always remembering, honing in on, and thinking about? They also just become a space, like you'll notice, there's again nothing about try to make everybody laugh, try to make your scene partner laugh, try to really be the biggest presence in the room. If anything, we're hopeful that this helps to take those understandings of improv that might be held culturally and really get to the root of what improv is. I saw someone in the chat say something about a tango. I think these are also shared agreements that are shared in different forms of art, whether that's jazz or visual art or really performative spaces and dance. I think that there's a lot of the same tenet that we can learn from in our work over time. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into describing some of the exercises that we do in our improv work. After this, we'll then talk about some of the ways that we're building this work even further. First, we started doing improv sessions at our institution at AHPM in 2019 and invited forums like this. And so we're hopeful that by discussing these games, you'll see Tanya and I giving some exercises, examples together too, and hopefully this illuminates some of these themes in action. And you'll notice none of the exercises are one person in front of a group or one person performing. They're really all done in collaboration and partnership. So a really helpful opening game or opening exercise is this idea of the stretch circle. So usually people are coming to our workshops from their day, whether that's a busy, inpatient service in the CTICU or coming from overnight shift or wherever they might be entering the space from. How do we bring ourselves together to just gently ground ourselves and be in this present space with one another? So how we might start is that we stand in a circle with one another, and one person starts and simply moves or stretches their body however might feel best for them. And the idea is that everybody else in the circle gently mirrors that person's stretch. As that initial leader is leading a stretch, they might say, "Oh, Amy's playing along, I like it." As you start that initial stretch, the first person who's leading might just say one or two sentences about what they're bringing into the room with each other. They might say, "I just had a really intense day on my unit. I'm really looking forward to being here, but please know that that's what I'm bringing into the space with me today." And then they'll pass it along the circle. Thanks, I saw a few of you shadowing along, it's wonderful. The passing of the circle then both allows us to continue to bear witness and acknowledge what we might be bringing into the space. And people start to reflect, "Oh, I don't stretch in that way. I don't move my body in that way. That person is doing a different kind of stretch that I might intuitively do for my body." And it starts to open up that idea of partnership and connection and collaboration. Next slide, please.
So the emotion mirror, we've done this in person and virtually. So when we do this exercise in person, we have people line up in two parallel lines. And then we'll have the first two people at the top of the line step forward. And one of them will whisper an emotion into my ear. And then with one single word, they will try to convey that emotion to their partner. So the word that they use is hello. And they're trying to harness whatever it is that they express, however their tone of voice is when they are feeling that emotion. We remind people not to overact. They don't need to make the emotion bigger than they usually would, just how you would express yourself if you were really feeling that emotion in that moment. The partner who is standing across from them will say, "Oh, Tanya, you seem," and then they will try to name that emotion. When we've done it virtually, actually, we'll just show you how it works virtually. So I will pick a word. When we've done this virtually, I might assign a word to people in the chat box, but I'll just assign myself a word. And Rachel, if you don't mind being my partner.
Yes.
Hello.
"Hi, Tanya. You seem timid."
So it's not quite my word, so I'm going to try again. Hello.
"Hi, Tanya. You seem weary."
Hello.
"Hi, Tanya. You seem nervous."
At that point, we would open it up to the group and ask if anyone picked up on it. And Rachel, this is my bad because the word was peaceful and I am clearly feeling nervous because we're giving a talk. So that's on me. Sometimes we will pick the word, like I often will try to pick the word anger
Mm.
or disappointment or brave, because I want to know what other people might pick up on or might perceive, because I think sometimes because of my external appearance, people don't associate those emotions for whatever their thoughts are about what a person like me expresses. And then that gives me information. Oh, when I'm expressing anger, people don't see it as anger. So I might need to say, I am angry, or I am feeling angry. And it is also helpful for my partner to recognize that when they thought that I was sad or quiet, what I actually was feeling in that moment was anger. We know that this happens all the time in the hospital. We found this exercise particularly helpful in talking about when we as a palliative care team have gotten called because a father is expressing anger or aggression when really it is a father who is expressing sadness. And because he is Black, a team member has automatically ascribed him an emotion that was not the emotion that he was experiencing or feeling in that time. So we found this exercise to be really helpful in talking through emotions.
I also want to name something that comes up that came up for me. This is my first time doing the exercise with Tanya on a smaller screen, and it adds a different layer to things. Similarly, in the time of COVID and masks, we did these exercises pre and post mask wearing, or pre and during mask wearing, and people would ask us, can I take off my mask? We don't take off our masks when we're across from people in our clinical settings, and we struggled with that too. It's like, oh right, there is also added information to how we are relating with people, the assumptions we might be making, and how we need to discuss and open up those conversations. So I learn again in this new space of doing the game on a small screen, when we are still on lots of small screens together. How does that inform how we're holding each other over time too? Next slide, please. So this exercise is one that really harkens back to that tenet of the space between us, and it's called the mirror. I'll explain the game and then talk about the things that have really been so illuminated by our colleagues who have done this exercise with us. And Tanya, if you don't mind joining me in showing a little bit of how this exercise works, I'd appreciate it. So this game is called the mirror. We have people mix up into different pairs of two. Again, notice that a lot of the exercises we do are in pairs of two or in small groups. And those pairs of two scatter about the room. They can be standing, they can be sitting, whatever feels comfortable and able for their body to be able to maintain for about 10 to 15 minutes. The two people are opposite each other, a comfortable physical distance width apart. And we start by simply having them be across from each other, notice their feet on the floor, and breathe. And notice if one is breathing, notice if one might already be having a little bit of jaw or shoulder tension, the things that we unknowingly hold within our bodies when we're in these difficult spaces with one another. I start to walk around the room, or the leader starts to walk around the room, for this instance it will be, and starts to lead the exercise. And so I will say something like, be in the space together. Notice your feet on the floor. Notice if you're breathing. Also start to notice, if being across from someone in this different kind of way, how you're feeling. Some people have told us that it feels kind of awkward, that it feels sort of uncomfortable. Where do I look? Do I look at the person's eyes? Do I look in the corner? Where do I sort of hold myself in this space? And already, can we start to think about the spaces that we're inhabiting with our patients and families, and how that interplay might be between us? Now, without using your words, without indicating who might start, one person is going to be a leader and one person is going to follow. That first person who leads will start to move their body, and the other person will start to mirror them. So in this instance, I started to lead and Tanya started to follow. Oops, I shouldn't go off screen. She won't be able to follow me. Then I continue walking around the room and I say, all right, now if you are the leader, start to move, and the follower simply mirrors to the best of their ability. Notice what you're feeling. How does it feel to be the leader? How does it feel to be the follower? We then let the space go for about 2 minutes. Feels kind of like a long time sometimes. And then I say, now without using your words and without indicating in any way, you're going to switch. Who is leading and who is following? So now the follower becomes the leader and the leader becomes the follower. I don't know if you noticed that Tanya switched. We've done this exercise together many times, so it feels fun between us. But she started to lead and I started to follow. I then walk around the room and allow that to go for about 2 minutes. I remind people, are you breathing? Notice your shoulders, notice your jaw, notice your knees. Without judgment, if you've forgotten to breathe, simply remind yourself to breathe if it feels helpful for you. After that 2 minutes, I'll then say, now without using your words and without indicating in any way, let's play. Let's see if you can start to trade back and forth who is leading and who is following. And over time, you start to see people really playing with what it might feel like. How do I show someone that I am leading and following? How do I see that someone is listening or is missing my cue to lead or to follow? And then I say to the group, now, for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to stop talking, and we're simply going to be in this space of passing back and forth who is leading and who is following. Some people have found that there are moments where they're not quite sure who is leading and who is following. They're simply mirroring each other in space over time. That's also not the goal. The goal is to remain curious and remain in partnership. And if you can, remember to breathe from time to time. So then I get quiet, and then we end the game and come to discuss together. And these are some of the themes. We have, I think, one exercise to talk about after this, just so you know. But we like to pause here because this exercise brings up a lot of conversation with people. A lot of people, our workshops are very intentionally interprofessional. So we'll have, heads of divisions doing these exercises with program coordinators. We'll have social workers and physicians and nurse practitioners and people of all disciplines and backgrounds together. We've started in the introduction of our groups to not have people say their title, simply to say their name and how they prefer to be called. And it's really created an interesting space. So after the mirror game, people start to say, I felt really uncomfortable at first. I felt really awkward and really strange. I didn't know where to look. I felt like this is like what am I doing? Like this is a strange exercise. And then I would say 9 times out of 10, what starts to arise is people say, then as I became gentler on myself and as I remembered to breathe, I started to find that there was this interplay between my partner and I, that we started to find this different, slower, interesting, the word sacred has even been used, space between one another. And even for folks for whom this game felt very awkward to me from top to tail, those 2 minutes always felt so painful and so long, usually then follow it up with, and I kept thinking about the mom in the NICU that I'm walking in and asking immediately all these incredibly vulnerable and incredibly difficult questions upon immediately meeting me. And I'm simply standing across a colleague and moving in space. So there's lots of lessons to be learned. This idea of presence of self, other, and the space between us, other being the partner, presence of self, presence of our partner, presence of our space between us, is what we do in palliative care. We enter into uncomfortable, difficult, complicated spaces, and we are present, and we see what happens in between us. And we use our tools and use our language and use our partnerships to then hopefully move into a space of partnership, a space that is sacred, a space that feels supported and collaborative over time. So thanks for listening to that exercise and the extra explanation. And I'll pass it on to Tanya for our last exercise.
So if there was a single exercise that really seems to resonate with primary palliative care, it would be this one. So in This Is My Partner, we ask, again, people to pair up, and one person is going to be the speaker for 2 minutes, and the other person is going to be the listener. And the listener cannot ask questions, cannot say things like, oh, I know exactly how that feels, or I've been there, or I totally understand, or tell me more. Does not say anything verbal, can nod, but no verbal cues, no additional questions. The person who is speaking is asked to speak about something that has been challenging for them. Usually we say, talk about something that's been frustrating for you in the past 6 months. It could be at work, outside of work, wherever, but something that has been frustrating and that you haven't seemed to be able to resolve or let go of or move on from. It still is frustrating. So we set a timer, the speaker speaks for 2 minutes uninterrupted, and then the timer goes off and then they switch. And so the listener becomes the speaker, speaks for something that's been challenging or frustrating for the past 6 months and is listened to for those 2 minutes. Then we come back together as a bigger group and we ask them to introduce each other using their name. So, and then introducing not the story that was told, but the underlying value that was expressed through that story. So it might be a single word or maybe 2 words, but a positive value that you heard as the listener through the expression of the story. So for example, I might tell Rachel, because we live in Los Angeles, that I was on my way to work and I was really frustrated and somebody cut me off and then honked, and how are people so rude? And I really, what's the hurry? And why can't we just be like not honking at each other? And it just feels like times are so hard, and then this made it harder, and I'm still a little shaken from that experience of getting cut off. And Rachel might introduce me to the group and say, this is my partner Tanya, and she really values consideration. And so I might not have recognized that from my story of sharing my frustration, but to hear that, and to hear that Rachel heard that value out of my story, makes me feel seen in maybe a way I didn't see myself. And I think obviously this is what we do in palliative care all the time. We hear a story of frustration, anger, sadness, disappointment, and what we really hear underneath that is love. I love my child. I care for my child deeply. And that's why I am expressing this. I want you to hear this story of my frustration. I'm taking the time to tell you this thing because I want you to see how much my child means to me. And then we take that back to the teams, right? And we say, this family really values. So often when we debrief this exercise, the person who spoke for 2 minutes said, oh, I thought 2 minutes was going to be so long. And somewhere in there, it felt really long. And then I had more to say. And it is consistent that like at 1 minute and 20 seconds, you hear the room get really quiet. And then all of a sudden, the person starts speaking again. And then the timer goes off and it interrupts them because they had more to say. And the person who was listening said, I felt so bad. I couldn't ask questions. I couldn't share how much I was feeling for them. I wanted to express more. And you go back to the speaker and you say, did you feel supported? Did you feel heard? And they said, I felt so supported. It meant so much to me that someone listened and maintained contact with me and heard me all the way through my story. I didn't feel a lack of support. I felt deeply supported. And so we find this to be really helpful in just sharing how much it means to be listened to and trusting that your partner will get there to the solution, or will it be able to explore their problem on their own. And in that, like, you don't need to rush in there and fix it, that they just need a little bit of time and a listening partner to be able to explore a little bit more. You've seen how we use these exercises to explore concepts of communication in primary palliative care. We've highlighted a couple places where we use these exercises to talk about cultural humility and having the self-awareness and really inviting and listening to the lived experiences of our patients and families and centering that in our work. We really feel strongly that listening to, hearing, amplifying the voices of our patients and families is exactly the work of palliative care. And so these exercises help us to show that.
We also now, in partnership with another physician on our team, Dr. Chris Adrian, have started to build out this work to include narrative medicine tenets and exercises that we've sort of adapted in an improv-y way also. So now we're creating their 3 to 4 hour workshops that utilize both narrative medicine and improv concurrently to both illuminate these themes about primary palliative care, about implicit bias and cultural humility, and also to reflect on ourselves as clinicians especially over the past 2 years. I think we are all needing new tools, different tools to connect to ourselves, the work, each other, to continue to lift up and recognize systems that are broken, and to be in spaces with one another anew. And our hope is that these narrative improv workshops are really beginning to open up that space with one another. And with that, we're so grateful. Next slide, please, Tanya. These are our emails. For the space, we wanted to intentionally leave a good 10 or 15 minutes here at the end. I've seen some questions peppering through the chat, so that we can both answer questions and also just hear your reflections, hear your thoughts, hear experience that you've had in this realm, and continue to learn from one another. So thank you so much for the space and for being together, and we're excited to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Tanya and Rachel. This was just incredible. And I'm so glad I had somebody to sit next to during it, because I just kept turning to Michael and being like, this is so good. So I wish you all have your Michaels next to you. There was one question that came through from Bob McCauley in the chat that kind of got answered, but I'm curious what you all would say to this, how specific improv training needs to be to palliative care to be valuable, i.e. would standard improv classes be helpful for a palliative care team? You know, kind of, I think also sort of I'm hearing the theme in that question too, of like, how directly do you need to translate these lessons? Do you need to really be explicit and spell out the takeaways, or how important that is? Can people kind of figure that out on their own?
Tanya, do you want to start this one off?
Sure. I really benefited from having a thought partner. The specific improv class I took was really founded on feminist principles, which also was very helpful. So they were open to this idea of improv being a way of life and living. And Tina Fey's book also talks about that having an improv approach to life. It was very helpful for me to have Rachel to talk through, what does this mean in palliative care? How does this apply to palliative care? So I think having a thought partner in all of this is very important.
I appreciate that. I also hear within that question, I think saw a bit when I glanced at the chat for a moment, that the idea of improv, sort of like we said at the beginning, might bring about different kinds of, like, what do you mean improv? What kind of feelings and thoughts? Which bring two things to mind for me. The first is that if you as an individual are interested in taking an improv class and learning more, and have the bandwidth and opportunity to do so, I would say go for it. Like with anything in life, if you have the interest to learn about it, go for it. Because I think that's also what started us off, is Tanya's interest in it and her bringing that interest back and opening up the space between us. I recognize that asking people to go to an improv class who might not have that same interest might have a tension within it, might be difficult. Though, you know, that could also be an interesting conversation to open up. I also think, as we were talking, something about, you know, the assumptions that are made about improv, or the knowledge we think we have about improv, sometimes makes me think about the assumptions people might have about palliative care, or they might hear about palliative care and think, oh, not that thing, not that, you know, not that, like, that's about this thing that I don't know that I want to be involved in yet, or involved with this patient care. And not to say that those are equitable examples, but it makes me think of how do we also broaden our experiences to learning from different models that might seem foreign or different, or might just seem, different for us to interact with over time.
Thanks, you all. I encourage folks to unmute or pop other questions in the chat. Sarah asked you guys earlier if you realized that everybody on this call was going to be asking you to come to their institutions to give a workshop. So just, I don't know, clear your schedule for the next year.
We recently did a workshop with the interns, and you know, that February, March timing for intern year is so hard, and you feel, and I mean, I cannot imagine being a trainee during COVID, and they've just been through so much and so much disconnection. And we used in our narrative medicine exercise, and then used these improv exercises to really talk about, what does it feel like to be seen? How do people see you? How do you see yourself? And it felt very restorative to them and very inspiring to us to reconnect with that they aren't an intern who's putting in orders, that they are Tanya, they are Rachel, they are Amy, and reconnecting them with that.
I'm curious, trying to find the balance of creating space for other folks to unmute, but also I have a billion questions, so I'll keep going. As you all, it sounds like a lot of what you do is sort of this really intentional space that's really devoted to a series of improv exercises. I wonder about incorporating one or two exercises in with other, maybe you're doing a 30-minute didactic on some communication topic or something, throwing an improv in there. Do you have experience with that? And if so, is there one or two exercises that you would say, these are the ones, if you're going to try one first time, this is the one you should try?
Yes, we've done that in our own practice on our team, whether it's before our morning huddle or before a morning team meeting, especially as this work was beginning to grow between Tanya and I. We would invite some of these exercises into those spaces with one another and found them really interesting to use as reflective or open pieces of dialogue with one another. That reminds me of part of the earlier question too, which was how much do you pull people's minds and thoughts into the ways that the improv exercises might speak to palliative medicine training. And we really both tried to partner with our colleagues who are present in the exercises with us, while also, of course, sharing the things that we have noticed over time to try to elicit more conversation. So we found more and more that people are really making those connections for themselves and really opening up dialogue, and we try to just engage in that dialogue as partners too. In terms of specific exercises, Tanya, I'd be curious what you have to say and your thoughts about the best ones to look to first.
A lot of our exercises have come from Rachel's own experience and theater background. And I also did a course at Northwestern on medical improv. And that was a 1 week. It's a fantastic course, occurs during the summer and is back on. It took a 2-year break while we were all distancing, but it's back on for this summer. It's run by Katie Watson, and it is a fantastic course on thinking through how to use these exercises, not necessarily for palliative, but for medical communication. And I would say, like, if there's an exercise that resonates with you that you've heard of and you feel comfortable with, that's the exercise to do. Sometimes stretch circle is kind of a nice one to get people after a long meeting, like up off their bodies and reflect on what they heard in the meeting or reflect on what they heard in interdisciplinary rounds. The emotion mirror I use in my class that I teach on cultural humility. And so that's a single exercise and all my students will go through that exercise. So I think whatever exercise feels right to you and you feel comfortable facilitating and see a need for ends up being the right exercise to use.
You all, when you are starting these exercises, what do you do? Some kind of work to create the psychological safety? I think in Bob's question of, like, people are a little suspicious, like, oh God, you're going to make me do improv. How do you decrease that initial freak out?
Yes, I would say the initial way we started this presentation is very similar to how we begin our spaces with folks. We don't actually use PowerPoints really in some of our focus groups lately. We really aim to use our words in our space with one another to review the things like the tenets of improv, the definition of improv. We'll talk about how we came to this work and really name that piece about improv. Not being about this comedic performance space, but really about being a collaborative space. So almost that first 15 minutes of our presentation is very, very similar to how we begin our exercises with one another. Like I said, we've also started to have folks introduce themselves simply by saying their name and how they would prefer to be referenced or called. and that seems to also create a more inclusive space. We share that what is reflected and shared in this space remains in the space. It is a space, if talking about how this impacts your work over time, great, but if there are things that are shared that are more of a personal nature, that is something that should stay in this room with one another. And we also open it up and ask folks their questions, what they're bringing into the room. What are the things that you're worried about? Are you having thoughts and questions that would be important to air out together with one another first before beginning the exercises together? And we find that modeling then really helps to open up the space together as we move through the exercises. Tanya, did I miss anything?
I'll just offer one more invitation if anyone has any last questions for Tanya and Rachel. There was some direct chats to me, Tanya and Rachel, for requests for the slides. So if you all are willing to send those to me, I'll send them out to our listserv. We also usually try to do a little kind of wrap up summary of the bullet points. So I'll put that together and see if you guys think I captured it.
And we do have resources that we can send along too. So we'll send you the slides and a little list of resources.
Yay, awesome. Well, please join me in thanking Tanya and Rachel again for your time today and your expertise and your inspiration. Thank you all for coming to our third NPPCE meeting. We'll see you again in July. Again, our next meeting is with Ann Kellerman on incorporating anti-racist practices into your teaching. We'll see you then. Thanks, everybody.